We've spent a lot of time on the Bengals the last couple of days, and rightfully so. The Bengals, a lot of news over the weekend that technically wasn't Bengals related, but it did impact the Bengals, of course, with these contracts that keep coming out. It keeps making things more and more difficult for the negotiations happening between a handful of players and the Cincinnati Bengals front office. We'll talk about that, as well as the Bengals' activity in free agency and what we can expect from them the rest of the way this upcoming week. But hanging out with us now covers your Cincinnati Bengals, Jay Morrison, giving us some time today. Jay, happy Tuesday. How are we today?
Doing great. I heard you guys talking before I came on. I literally just texted another Bengals beat writer and asked him, make this line make sense. It's up to 7.5 now with UC and Oklahoma State. I don't get it at all. It was just 3 days ago that they did not look good. So, but usually when you think a line looks fishy, there's a reason for it. So I don't know that I would touch it.
Speaking of something that looks fishy, I was scrolling through Twitter, and I saw your face. I saw your picture. I saw a few faces of a lot of the great beat writers that covered the Cincinnati Bengals, of course. Why don't, Casey, go ahead and pop that up. Jay, explain your Who Day nights. And that's my friend Charlie Goldsmith right there. There's Paul Day. I mean, and there's Jay. Jay, right there. Well, what is happening here? The Growler podcast, Who Day nights. What is happening in this picture right here?
So I don't know what the original photo is. So Paul does with Mark, the guy on the left, he does Who Day Light on Friday. And now this week for free agency, we're doing a live podcast every night at 9:00. And we had one up. It was from Baywatch nights. And they had put our faces on them. And now that we asked people, listeners, viewers to create their own. And so that was the first one we received. And I got put in a dress, which is fine. That's the first time ever, I will mention. But now, the more submissions are coming in. We got one that's Seinfeld related that they turned me into Kramer. Charlie, unfortunately, is a female. Again, he's Elaine. So you will see that on tonight's live show at 9.
Does Charlie have the dance moves like Elaine? That's the big question.
I hope not for him.
No, Jay, I know we didn't bring you on to talk about, of course, that. We appreciate you giving us some time today. Busy time, obviously. I joked earlier. I'm like, man, when the Bengals do figure out these contract extensions with T and Jamar and Trey, I don't know what the hell we'll be talking about when they get all that stuff done. I feel like it's the same thing every time you come on. We'll definitely talk free agency in a moment. But obviously, one thing we discussed on yesterday's show was how does this organization, how does this team, with all the distractions and all the talking points about the Trey Hendrickson negotiation, Tee Higgins negotiation, Jamar Chase, with all of that going on, that plays such a heavy role of the makeup of this team and not knowing how some of these contracts are going to play out, how much of a distraction is that? How much of a roadblock is that when this team is preparing to fill out a roster and they have a ton of cap space and they've added quite a few players yesterday? How much of a distraction, how difficult is it for them to navigate through free agency and prepare for the upcoming draft when there's so much uncertainty about what the finality is going to be with the handling of these negotiations with Jamar T and Trey Hendrickson?
Yeah, I don't think it's that much of a distraction. It's not as though, Trey maybe is a little bit more of a wild card on how that can play out, but you pretty much have a framework in place with Jamar. You know what that's going to look like, basically. And same with T. It's far enough apart where you're not quibbling over pennies, but it's still, they have a pretty good idea of where that's going to land. So it's just a matter of kind of going back and forth and seeing who's willing to concede this, there, and that. So I don't think it necessarily impedes what they need to do in free agency. The Trey Hendrickson thing is interesting. They granted him the request to go seek a trade. A lot of times when that happens with a player of his caliber, it happens pretty quickly. Like we saw Joe Tooney when the Chiefs gave him the opportunity to do that, and bam, I think it was within hours he landed a deal with the Bears. And we haven't seen that from Trey. So that leads me to believe that either the compensation isn't where the Bengals want it to be, or the extension after the trade isn't where Trey wants it to be. Trey's maybe seeing that his market isn't quite what he thought it was. So I really think that opens the door for his return. And, probably I don't think they're going to give him a 3-year deal, anything like that. I could see them just saying, hey, okay, we'll double what your base salary. He's set to make 16 this year. We'll double that to 32, and then we'll let you hit free agency next year. And then that way he's not sour. He knows he can still make another run at a big contract next year. But they do this all the time. Duke talked about at the combine about parallel paths, and And especially with Jamar and T having the same agent, you're kind of working those things together. They've that not just this organization, any NFL team is very, very adept at multitasking.
When it does come to these contracts, like we know Jamar's going to get his. We feel pretty confident about T at this point, but like, and it sounds like such a generic question. Like, what is taking so long? Like, you know that you're going to keep them. What are they asking for that is just so dang difficult? I mean, a lot of people will just throw out, okay, it's the cash, issues for this team. Well, it's February or it's March right now. I'm sorry, and they say, well, it gets done in July. Did more cash just come into the hands of the Brown family all of a sudden to get a deal done in July versus now? Like, I know it sounds very generic-y, but like, why is this taking so long to get done? I'm not comparing the Bengals to the Browns by any means, but Myles Garrett, Andrew Berry sit down for 36 hours and boom, they hash out the biggest contract, non-quarterback contract in football. Why is this taking so long? Why is this being made to seem more difficult than it needs to be? Jamar Chase especially, but even for Tee Higgins, if the plan truly is to find a way to keep him.
Yeah, I mean, the Bengals are historically hard to negotiate with, and they set a value on a guy and they stick to it. And in this case with T, they've got the ultimate leverage with the franchise tag. They know he's not going to sit out the year. They know he's eventually going to sign it. And so I'm sure that's what the haggling is right now, is over guaranteed money on an extension and not so much the average annual value. And kind of the same with Jamar. I think Jamar, it's more get T done and see where that lands. And then, Jamar is under contract this year, and I fully expect the extension to happen at some point this season, but there's really no rush. It would help. I mean, if you got him done, you lower the cap hit this year that he's going to make on that 5th-year option and kind of spread out some of that stuff later in the deal. So you would actually give yourself more money to spend in free agency. But I think they already know what that's going to look like. Whatever the final dollar amount is, they already have an idea of how much more money they're going to get. So I think they're spending with that in mind right now. It's like anything else. No matter how far apart the sides are or how close they are, the Bengals they set a mark and they don't like to come off of it. And that's not really how the league operates anymore. I mean, you look at some of these deals that have been done in free agency, the Bengals need help at guard and they haven't got one yet. And some of these prices, in my mind, have been crazy. The Aaron Banks deal, 4 for $77. I had him as maybe the 7th or 8th best guard in the free agency class this year. And he gets that huge deal. At some point, if you have a need, you have to go above your comfort zone and get that need filled. It's just like the draft. Last year, they had to get a run stopper. They didn't get one in free agency, and they painted themselves into that difficult position of having to reach for McKinley Jackson in the 3rd round when they probably should have taken that guy in the 4th round. It's just sometimes it works out for them and they do the financially right things, and then other times it kind of bites them because they sit where they think they should sit, and that other people swoop in, offer more, and guys they want go elsewhere.
You talked about yesterday with one of the Bengals signings. Tyler Shelvin was the Bengals' 4th-round pick in 2021. The Bengals went out and got T.J. Slayton, who was picked just 53 picks later. You pointed out Shelvin played 5 career games. Slayton, 64. Another pending free agent right now that Casey McAllister, our producer here in the room, and I have talked about is potentially solving another wrong. Tevin Jenkins was taken just a few picks before Jackson Carman in the 2nd round of that draft. You said the Bengals need to attack a guard. Do you think there's any chance they swing as big as a Tevin Jenkins, even with some of those deals being much higher than expected?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be interested to see where Tevin comes in, but I definitely think he would be a guy that would be in play. They obviously were looking for offensive linemen in that draft, and they could have taken Tevin Jenkins, even though he went before Carman. Yeah. They traded down with New England, and at that point, when they traded down, Jenkins was still on the board, and then he goes 1 pick after they trade down. I think it was 5 spots. I think they went from 41 to 46. I could be wrong on that, but they only went down a few spots. So Jenkins was there if they wanted him, and it didn't work out. But I think he would be in a 10 to 12 million average annual value contract, and that's just a little above. Alex Kappa was set to make 10.3 this year. They signed him. What was it? It was a 4-year, $35 million deal. So you look at inflation, you look at the way the cap's gone up. I think that's right in line. For the longest time, they didn't really value the guard position, You did see that change with the Kappa signing, and so I do think a guy like Jenkins could be in play. And then we talked about this on the podcast last night. Kind of the theme of all these signings they've had so far has been the familiarity aspect, where they're bringing back Tanner Hudson and Mike Gesicki and Cody Ford and B.J. Hill, and then they go get Samaje Perine, who they had for years, and then even Slayton. He's never played for the Bengals, but he played for the Bengals defensive line coach for 3 years in Green Bay. So if familiarity is a theme, Kevin Zeitler's still sitting out there too. He was the first-round pick in 2012. They let him walk after 4 years because, as I said, they don't really value the guard position. And he's had a heck of a career. He's still one of the top-rated guards by PFF, and I think you could bring him in on a one-year deal and kind of let him chase a ring at the end of his career. I know it was 2-3 years ago the Bengals made a little bit of a run at him in free agency, and Kevin Zeitler's camp was not impressed at all with their offer. They actually viewed it as insulting. So maybe that burned that bridge. I don't know, but things change. It's been a few years. Maybe that's been salved. But I think Jenkins and Zeitler would be two really good options to bring in. Even if it's Zeitler for 1 year, you draft a guy, you bring him in, you still have Cody Ford as a backup, and you kind of put yourself in this position next year to go get a guard again. But I think you feel really comfortable with a Kevin Zeitler for 1 year.
Signing Zeitler to a one-year deal, drafting a guard would remind me a lot of the situation the Bengals went into week one with last year. 1 year deal with Trent Brown, drafted Amarius Mims early, kind of allowed him to ease along. So far for the Bengals in free agency, they kept Osai and B.J. Hill, as you said, added T.J. Slayton and Oren Burks, living in that mid-level free agency signing range that we usually see them live in. Which of these guys defensively do you think will have the biggest immediate impact on this team in 2025?
That's a good question. It's either Slayton or Osai. I would probably say Slayton, just because we kind of saw it last year with Osai. Came on at the end of the year. A lot depends. If he's got Trey Hendrickson on the other side, he could really have a big year. If he's the dude and Miles Murphy doesn't develop, then I don't know that you're going to see that from Joseph Osai, that jump that they're hoping for, and really a really affordable kind of 1 year, $7 million. That's a great prove it deal for the Bengals, and it's a good payday for Joseph Osai. He made less than $5 million in his first 4 years in the league. He gets $7 million this year, but I think Slayton is the guy. That this team has been so bad against the run for so long, and even when they went, it felt like they kind of overpaid for DJ Reader, but he was incredible when he did play. But he missed a lot of time. He had 2 serious injuries that he only played 5 games that first year in Cincinnati. And there was so much more to him than his play, that what he meant. He was kind of the heart and soul of that defense, of that locker room. And I think they would do that move again if you could go back in time. But Slayton, I don't want to compare him. He's not as good as DJ Reader, but he's that same type of player, 330-pound run stopper in the middle of the defense. And that's kind of what this has been, bringing back B.J. Hill, who was PFF's number 10 run stopper last year among defensive tackles. You put B.J. Hill in there with Slayton. I think Jenkins and Jackson both had promising rookie years, so you would like to see them kind of develop and continue that ascension. But you don't have a pass rusher in there at that defensive tackle position, and that's what so much of this talk was about going into this offseason, was improving the pass rush. And so I think that's what the defensive tackle in the draft is going to look like. Go get a good 3 tech. There's a bunch of them in this draft. But I think, to answer your question, Slayton is going to have a bigger impact than Osai will.
Well, you're a pros.
And Oren Burks is – I don't even know about Oren Burks. He's never been a starter in this league. He's only 1 year he played more than 14% of the defensive snaps. Again, it's a guy that I think is a depth piece. He is really good on special teams. He is a solid tackler. He's only missed 3 tackles the last 3 years, so he hasn't gotten a lot of opportunities because he hasn't played. But when plays have come his way, he's made them. And I think more important, the Eagles lost Nakobe Dean during that Super Bowl run, and Burke stepped in and was a key player on defense, and he played really well on that big stage. And I think that really attracted the Bengals to him. But I could see them kind of going back to that old template of the third round linebacker, like they did with Logan Wilson, like they did so many times before Logan Wilson, and it failed. That's another position where you sign a guy lower end in free agency, and then you double down with the one in the draft.
it seems like his finances matched up more filling that ADG role as opposed to maybe the Jermaine Pratt linebacker too. But you had a perfect segue into my next and last question. The Bengals haven't really addressed the pass rush whatsoever in free agency, and we know that was one of the biggest needs going into this offseason. With Trey Hendrickson obviously given permission to seek a trade, does the lack of options still available to address that pass rush bring the Bengals back to the table with Hendrickson, whether to try to bring his number down if he's not finding the market that he wants, or if they're willing to budge on their number because there's not a lot of options out there to get to the quarterback?
Yeah, I do. I think it all plays in. Number one, the no real offers for Trey so far, and the fact that all these edge rushers have flown off the board, and some of them, yeah, crazy money for Myles Garrett, but some of these other guys, I think Chase Young, Malcolm Kuntz, a lot of these guys went for less than a lot of us expected. So I do think it recalibrates what could happen with Trey Hendrickson. And again, you've got a lot of good edge rushers in the draft. And I think you feel pretty good about Trey Hendrickson and ascending Joseph Osai. I know people like to hammer on Myles Murphy, but he showed some flashes of winning more toward the end of the year. He's only going into year 3, a guy that hasn't played a lot. The increased playing time could pay dividends for him too. So you feel different about it, obviously, if you bring back Trey Hendrickson. But you still have a draft class where it's not just the D tackles. There's a lot of good D ends too, and maybe that's first and second round, a D end and a D tackle, and then you're off and running.
All right, Jay Morrison, awesome enough to give us some time. Last thing, on the way out, you look at the AFC North. Obviously, Cleveland's not a threat to Cincinnati at this point. Baltimore still the favorite out of the AFC North at this point, barring any drastic additions for the Bengals at this point to help elevate them. You look at Pittsburgh right now, obviously adding DK Metcalf, Aaron Rodgers rumors, kind of floating around out there. How the AFC North kind of stacking up, in your opinion, with a lot of the teams with deficiencies there and having to address some of those? How's the AFC North kind of stacking up in the early stages of free agency and the draft coming up around the corner, and how that impacts Cincinnati, of course?
Yeah, I think Baltimore's still the team to beat. I'm not ready to write off the Browns. They've got an issue at quarterback, obviously with the Deshaun Watson situation, but that's still a good enough roster where if they get some pieces in the draft, they can be a really good team. Steelers, I don't know. What are they going to do at quarterback if it's not Aaron Rodgers? And even if it is that the answer? I mean, he's getting older. He didn't look that great last year when he was healthy. The year before, obviously the Achilles. So that's a big issue. It's been their issue for years, and they haven't, since Ben left, and they haven't been able to solve it. So I think the Bengals are in a good spot. I would put them right now as probably, you got Burrow, Chase, Higgins. You're right there, and they've got some holes to fill, obviously, but I think they're right there with Baltimore. Pittsburgh, Cleveland still have some work to do.
All right, good stuff. Jay Morrison, BengalsTalk.com, covers your Bengals. Awesome enough to give us some time today. Jay, we appreciate your time as always, and we'll talk soon.
All right, thanks, guys.